It was a quiet spring night in 1734. The streets were calm. The city slept until flames tore through them. 45 buildings, including the city's most important hospital, were swallowed by fire. Panic spread like wildfire. Chaos reigned, and at the center of it all, a woman named Josèphe Angélique, a black slave accused of setting the fire. But was she truly guilty? Or was she just a convenient scapegoat for a terrified city? Did she act out of revenge, desperation, or something else entirely? How could one woman be blamed for such destruction? And why did the authorities focus all their anger and suspicion on her? This is not a story invented by AI. This is real history. And it's one of the most haunting tales of 18th century Montreal. If you want to follow this story to the very end, make sure to subscribe. Tell me, which country are you watching from? Welcome to Caseborne. Now let me take you back to Montreal, 1734. A city on the edge, a city of contradictions. The streets were narrow, lined with wooden houses that creaked with every gust of wind. Life moved slowly during the day, but beneath the calm surface, tension simmered. The city was ruled by French colonial law, and everyone knew their place, or thought they did. Most residents were French settlers, struggling to carve out a life in the harsh Canadian winters. Markets were crowded, churches were central, and gossip flowed faster than the river that ran through the town. People whispered about debts, rivalries, and secrets best left unspoken. But lurking in plain sight were those who had no voice at all. Among them were the slaves, black, indigenous, sometimes both. They were property, yet they were human. Their work was endless cooking, cleaning, fetching water, laboring in the fields. They had little freedom and almost no protection. And in this fragile society, their existence was tolerated as long as it caused no trouble. Josèphe Angélique was one of these slaves. Born in Lisbon, Portugal, she had been brought to Canada at a young age. By 1734, she lived in Montreal under the ownership of a French merchant. Her days were filled with chores, her nights with whispers of longing for freedom. Every step she took was watched. Every word she spoke was measured. Life for Josèphe was harsh. She was expected to obey without question. She slept in a small, cold room, often sharing it with others. Food was scarce, and affection rarer still. And yet she carried herself with a quiet strength, a subtle defiance that did not go unnoticed by those around her. Tension hung in the air like smoke before a fire. Rumors circulated constantly. Some whispered about disagreements between slaves and their masters. Others spoke of secret relationships, forbidden by law and custom. And then there were the murmurs about Josèphe herself, whispers that she was daring, clever, and unafraid. Josèphe's daily life was a series of small battles. Each command she followed was a reminder of her status. Each glance from her master carried weight. And yet, even in the monotony, there were cracks. Moments when she might catch a breath, a fleeting sense of autonomy. Moments when the fire of rebellion, of frustration, could quietly smolder. The streets of Montreal were alive with stories. Stories of debts, betrayals, small acts of cruelty, small acts of kindness. And in these stories, Josèphe existed not as a character of fiction, but as a real person, caught in a world that offered her little mercy. As the days passed, the pressure mounted. Houses were cramped, streets narrow. The city slept uneasily. And Josèphe, in her small room, must have felt the weight of her existence pressing down on her. It's impossible to know her exact thoughts, but we can imagine the mix of fear, frustration, and quiet determination. In this world, small acts could have enormous consequences. A spilled pot, a harsh word, a disagreement with a neighbor, any of these could escalate into disaster. Montreal was a city poised on a knife's edge. And Marie-Joseph was at its center, a figure whose every move was scrutinized, whose every action could be twisted by gossip, by fear, by anger. Now let me take you to the night of April 10th, 1734, a night that would be remembered for centuries in Montreal. The day had been ordinary. Merchants went about their stalls, children played in the narrow streets, and the city buzzed with the low hum of daily life. Yet, as darkness fell, something ominous began to stir. It started quietly, almost imperceptibly. A faint smoke curled up between the wooden houses. People noticed it first as an unusual scent in the air, a hint of something burning. Then came the flicker of light, small at first, almost playful against the shadows. But fire is never gentle, and soon it revealed its true hunger. By late evening, the flames were out of control. The fire spread with terrifying speed through the tightly packed wooden homes. The crackling, the snapping of beams, the shouts of frightened citizens filled the streets. Panic erupted as families scrambled to save their loved ones, to carry what belongings they could, to flee the advancing inferno. The Hotel D, the city's most important hospital, was one of the first major buildings threatened. Nurses and patients ran into the streets, dragging beds in crates, shouting warnings to anyone nearby. The fire leapt from roof to roof, consuming everything in its path. The wooden structures fed it like kindling, and within hours, entire blocks were swallowed in orange and black smoke. Witnesses later described the chaos as unimaginable. People ran blindly, children clinging to parents, neighbors helping neighbors when they could. Some tried to douse the flames with buckets of water, only to see their efforts overwhelmed by the intensity of the blaze. Others frantically grabbed valuable silverware, clothes, family Bibles, while the world around them seemed to melt into fire. The streets were full of noise. Screams, the crackle of burning timber, the roar of the wind carrying sparks like deadly embers. Horses reared in fear, carts overturned, and some residents froze in shock, unable to move. And everywhere, the fire's glow painted faces with terror and disbelief. And yet, amid the chaos, suspicion began to take root. Whispers traveled faster than the flames. Who had started this fire? How could it have spread so quickly? And then, inevitably, attention turned to Marie-Josèphe Angélique. The details were unclear, the evidence thin, but in a city looking for someone to blame, she became a figure of focus. Some witnesses later claimed to have seen her near the scene. Others remembered only shadows, fleeting figures in the smoke. No one could be certain, and yet the accusation was enough to change everything. The city's fear demanded an answer. A culprit, and Marie-Josèphe, a black slave with a spirited nature, fit the role that fear had carved out. In the streets, people shouted, directed each other, tried to organize a response. Firefighters, well, the closest equivalent at the time, pulled water from the river, passed buckets from hand to hand, formed human chains, and worked desperately to halt the fire's advance. But wooden houses, closely packed and dry, were relentless. The Hotel Dieu itself, once a symbol of care and refuge, was now a target of destruction. Its walls smoked and cracked. Windows shattered under the heat. Patients, many too weak to escape on their own, were carried out by nurses and townsfolk. And as the hospital burned, so did the sense of security in Montreal. If such an essential place could be reduced to ash, what else was safe? Along the main streets, homes of ordinary citizens went up in flames. Roofs collapsed with thunderous crashes, fires spread to neighboring houses, and the night sky glowed bright orange. Sparks floated on the wind, landing on thatched roofs and igniting new points of panic. People screamed warnings, yelled for help, begged neighbors to save their families. Amid the panic, there were small acts of heroism. A young man risked his life to rescue a child trapped in a burning home. A woman carried her elderly mother on her back, running through streets lined with fire. And yet, for every brave act, there were failures. Possessions lost, homes destroyed, lives forever changed. And through it all, Marie Josepha's presence lingered in the stories. Was she truly responsible? Or was she merely a convenient scapegoat for a city desperate to understand the disaster unfolding around them? The details remained elusive. No one could pinpoint her actions with certainty, but the fear of blame, the need for an explanation, focused suspicion squarely on her. Witnesses later recounted the scene with vivid horror. The streets were full of people running and screaming, one said. Smoke filled the air, and the fire moved faster than we could. Another remembered the hospital. We carried beds into the street, dragged patients who could barely walk. The heat was unbearable. Their memories painted a city in chaos, alive with terror and confusion. Even the city leaders were overwhelmed. They attempted to organize fire breaks, direct efforts, contain the flames, but the fire defied all order. It seemed almost alive, consuming everything indiscriminately, a force that no one could fully control. And as it raged, the human stories multiplied. Families torn apart, belongings lost, lives upended in an instant. Amid the noise and confusion, the accusation of Marie Joseph hung like smoke in the air. People whispered her name in fear and anger. Was she hiding? Was she fleeing? Or was she simply another terrified person caught in a nightmare not of her own making? The line between fact and rumor blurred, as it often does when terror strikes suddenly and fiercely. And so the night stretched on. Fire consumed buildings, streets glowed, citizens ran, screamed, and cried. The Hotel Dieu, homes of ordinary settlers, and the main thoroughfares became a landscape of destruction. And at the center of it, shrouded in uncertainty, was Marie Josèphe Angélique, a name that would haunt Montreal's history forever. Even as dawn approached, the city was not safe. Smoldering ruins, embers carried by the wind, collapsed roofs, and frightened survivors filled the streets. The fire had destroyed 45 buildings, a staggering portion of the city. People began to realize the scale of the disaster. Panic gave way to despair, and despair to a need for answers. Questions buzzed in every corner. How did it start? Could it have been prevented? And most importantly, who was responsible? Marie Josèphe Angélique became the focus of every whispered theory, every fearful suspicion, every attempt to make sense of the chaos. And in the minds of the people, the night of April 10th, 1734, became more than just a fire. It was a symbol of fragility, of fear, and of a society quick to find someone to blame. A night when Montreal's calm was destroyed in flames, leaving behind ashes, sorrow, and a mystery that would endure for generations. Now let me explain what happened after the fire, how the city turned from chaos to accusation, and how Marie Josèphe Angélique became the center of a storm she may never have sought. The morning after the fire, Montreal was a city in shock. Streets were littered with charred timbers, ashes of homes, and remnants of lives abruptly interrupted. People wandered in disbelief, clutching what little they had salvaged. And amidst the ruins, a name began to surface. Marie Josèphe Angélique. Authorities acted quickly. The fire had destroyed 45 buildings, including the Hotel Dieu. The citizens demanded answers. Fear and anger hung in the air like a thick fog. Someone had to be held accountable. And in that climate, suspicion fell heavily on Marie Josèphe, a black slave with a spirited nature and a history of tension with her master. She was arrested without ceremony. A few guards approached her small room, called out her name, and she was brought into custody. Witnesses later described her as calm, even defiant, though one could imagine the fear coiling tightly within her. Being taken by the authorities, separated from everything familiar, must have felt like being swallowed by the city itself. The charges were clear but broad. She was accused of setting the fire intentionally, of causing destruction and panic. But behind the words, the unspoken accusations loomed. A black woman, an enslaved person, dared to defy the rigid hierarchy of the city. Could the fire have been an accident? Perhaps, but in a society desperate for someone to blame, evidence mattered less than fear. Conditions of detention were harsh. She was confined in a small cell, often cold and damp, with little comfort. The walls echoed with the whispers and cries of other prisoners. Guards watched her constantly. Every glance, every movement was scrutinized. And in this isolation, the weight of the city's anger must have pressed upon her like the heavy wooden beams of the burned houses outside. Outside the walls of the prison, the population's mood was tense. People wanted justice, and their justice was impatient. They had seen their homes, their streets, their hospital burned. Some demanded swift punishment. Others whispered doubts, fearing the wrong person might be punished. But suspicion and fear were stronger than reason, and Marie Josèphe, an outsider in every sense, became the symbol of both the disaster and the society's anxieties. Her race and status made her vulnerable in ways that went beyond the fire. As a black slave, she occupied a precarious position in Montreal's social hierarchy. She had few rights, and those around her knew it. Rumors and gossip twisted her identity, painting her as capable of more than she perhaps ever intended. The society in which she lived was quick to conflate fear with guilt, rebellion with crime, and difference with danger. Marie Josèphe's interrogations were intense. Witnesses were brought forward, some claiming to have seen her near the scene, others speaking of her alleged temper or defiance. The line between fact and suspicion blurred. Guards and officials pushed for confessions, for clarity, for someone to stand out as responsible. And Marie Josèphe, confined and isolated, had to navigate a system designed to overwhelm and intimidate. The city's anger extended beyond her. People wanted answers to the chaos that had consumed their homes. Who could have allowed such destruction? Who could bear responsibility? And in a society where slaves were already marginalized, Marie Josèphe became a convenient focus, a vessel into which collective fear and frustration were poured. It's impossible to know her exact thoughts during these days. Was she scared? Angry? Desperate? Perhaps all of these. She had survived the fire, the panic, and now she faced the weight of accusation and prejudice. Each step of the judicial process was a reminder of how powerless she was, how easily her fate could be decided by others. The trial itself loomed as a spectacle. People gathered to witness, to comment, to judge. The legal process under French colonial rule was formal, but it was also rigid and unforgiving, especially for someone of her status. Public opinion added pressure. Every rumor, every whisper, every fearful glance from the citizens became part of the environment in which she would be judged. And yet, Marie Josèphe remained at the center, not just as an accused, but as a symbol. To some, she was guilty of arson. To others, she represented the anxieties of a city struggling to maintain order, to reconcile fear with reality, and to understand a disaster that had touched every household. Her identity, her race, her status as a slave, all these factors shaped how she was seen and how the proceedings unfolded. Even within the courtroom, the tension was palpable. Witnesses recounted the fire, the chaos, the smoke, and the panic. Officials questioned her, trying to piece together a narrative that made sense to a terrified population. And as they probed, the truth became murky. Each testimony, each accusation, carried the weight of fear as much as fact. It is important to note the societal context. Montreal in 1734 was not a forgiving place for a black slave, especially one accused of a crime affecting the entire community. Prejudices shaped perception, and the judicial system reflected the values and anxieties of its time. Marie Josèphe's fate was intertwined not only with the fire itself, but with the rigid social structures and collective fear that dominated the city. In the streets outside, citizens followed every development. Some whispered hope for justice, others feared injustice. People speculated about motives, about what Marie-Joseph might have felt, about why someone so marginalized could be accused of such devastation. The collective imagination of the city filled in gaps with suspicion and assumption, adding layers of complexity to the unfolding trial. And so, the arrest and the beginning of the trial were more than legal proceedings. They were a reflection of Montreal's struggle to understand the fire, to assign blame, and to assert control over a world suddenly revealed as fragile. Every question asked, every witness testimony, every glance toward Marie-Joseph was colored by fear, anger, and the urgent need to make sense of chaos. Through it all, Marie-Joseph's figure remained enigmatic. Was she guilty? Did she act out of revenge, frustration, or desperation? Or was she simply the scapegoat of a society eager to punish someone visible, someone different, someone vulnerable? These questions would define the trial, haunt the city, and echo through history. As the proceedings continued, the tension never abated. Citizens watched, waited, speculated. Officials pressed for answers. And Marie-Joseph, confined and observed, had to endure the scrutiny, the whispers, and the mounting pressure of a city desperate for closure. In these moments, the true weight of her situation becomes clear. She was caught between the reality of her own life and the projection of the city's fears. Every action could be twisted into guilt, every silence interpreted as defiance. And in a society quick to judge and slow to forgive, the stakes could not have been higher. And so, the story of Marie-Josèphe Angélique, arrested and thrust into the center of a fire-ravaged city's fear and fury, continued to unfold. Each day in detention, each interrogation, each witness testimony layered the narrative with tension, suspense, and moral complexity. Her arrest was not just the capture of an individual. It was the ignition of a trial that would explore not only the fire itself, but the fragile, fearful society that demanded an explanation, a culprit, and a sense of order restored. Now let me explain what happened in the days and weeks after Marie-Josèphe Angélique's arrest, when Montreal's fear and anger took a very formal shape in the courtroom. The trial began under the strict rules of French colonial law. The courthouse was a place of authority, echoing with the voices of officials, scribes, and the murmurs of citizens who had come to witness the proceedings. Marie-Joseph was brought before the magistrates, her hands bound, her gaze steady yet revealing the strain of confinement. Witnesses were called one by one. Some had seen smoke rising in the night. Some claimed to have glimpsed a figure near the fire. Others spoke of her temperament, her defiance, or past quarrels. Each testimony carried weight, but contradictions quickly became apparent. One said she fled the scene. Another claimed she lingered. One insisted she was angry. Another swore she appeared fearful. Interrogations were intense. Officials pressed her for details, demanding explanations, questioning her motives. Her words were carefully measured. She denied any intentional wrongdoing, yet every denial seemed to meet with skepticism. In a society eager for resolution, doubt was often ignored. Silence could be twisted into guilt. Every hesitation was a mark against her. The evidence itself was limited. There were no witnesses to the exact moment the fire began, no clear confession, no conclusive proof. The investigation relied heavily on circumstantial accounts and assumptions drawn fear and prejudice. Yet the weight of public opinion and societal bias hung heavily over the proceedings. And there were tensions that went beyond the fire. Marie-Joseph was a black woman, a slave, and in the eyes of the court, that status colored everything. Could she be judged solely for the alleged crime? Or was her trial also about control, about asserting authority over those the city deemed inferior? The distinction was subtle, but it shaped every interaction in the courtroom. As the trial unfolded, the contradictions in testimonies became impossible to ignore. Some witnesses accused her of deliberate arson. Others described accidents, negligence, or the spread of fire beyond anyone's control. The magistrates listened, asked questions, and occasionally scolded witnesses for inconsistencies, but the need to find a culprit never wavered. Debates over her guilt were heated. Officials, citizens, and scribes argued over whether the fire had been an act of revenge, a careless mistake, or something more sinister. Was Marie-Joseph really capable of setting so many buildings ablaze? Could one woman have caused the destruction of 45 structures, including the Hôtel d'Ille? These questions were both rhetorical and accusatory, leaving Marie-Joseph in the eye of the storm. There was a constant tension between evidence and assumption. Testimonies were colored by fear, by the desire to find someone to blame. Each witness had a perspective shaped by personal experience, social status, or prejudice. And as a result, the narrative of the fire became a mosaic of conflicting accounts, impossible to fully reconcile. Despite the contradictions, the courtroom atmosphere was charged. Officials sought to impose order, to extract clarity, yet chaos lingered. The public watched closely. Citizens whispered, reacted, and speculated. Every statement Marie-Joseph made, every gesture, was scrutinized, debated, and interpreted. The weight of expectation pressed down on her like the ashes of the city itself. At times, Marie-Joseph appeared composed, answering questions with precision. At other moments, she showed signs of straying, her eyes betraying the fear and exhaustion of days in detention. Every glance in the courtroom seemed to carry judgment. Every whisper seemed to echo suspicion. And yet, the truth of her intentions remained elusive. The trial highlighted the fragility of justice in a society built on hierarchy and fear. Facts were debated, but interpretations were often skewed by race, status, and public pressure. The magistrates faced a dilemma: how to assign guilt in a case with little concrete evidence, yet immense social and emotional stakes. Some officials argued for caution, for consideration of all accounts. Others pushed for swift judgment, motivated by fear, anger, and the need to restore a sense of order. The trial became a complex dance between law, emotion, and societal expectation, a struggle to find certainty in uncertainty. And through it all, Marie-Joseph remained at the center. She was both defendant and symbol. Her life, her actions, and her identity were scrutinized. The question of her guilt extended beyond the fire itself. It touched on morality, social hierarchy, and the human tendency to find someone to blame when chaos erupts. The witnesses' testimonies continued to contradict one another. People disagreed on her presence, her actions, her motives. One person claimed she had spoken angrily the night of the fire. Another insisted she was calm, fearful, trying to help. No single account could resolve the tension, yet the city's need for resolution demanded a verdict. In the courtroom, one could feel the weight of history pressing down. This was more than a legal proceeding. It was a reflection of a society confronting its fears, confronting the fragility of its order, and confronting a woman who stood at the intersection of race, status, and suspicion. And so, the trial dragged on, each day adding layers of complexity. Each testimony, each question, each contradiction added suspense, moral ambiguity, and tension. Marie-Joseph's actions were dissected, her words scrutinized, her life analyzed. The line between fact and assumption blurred, leaving everyone with uncertainty, unease, and a gnawing sense of injustice. Through it all, one thing remained clear. The trial was as much about the fire as it was about society's need for a scapegoat. And in that pursuit, the question of Marie-Joseph's true culpability became almost impossible to answer. Witnesses spoke of the fire, of screams, of panic. Officials debated motives, capacities, and possibilities. And Marie-Joseph, bound by her status and circumstance, navigated a courtroom that demanded certainty where there was none. The suspense was relentless, and the sense of injustice palpable. Every moment of the trial heightened the tension. Each contradiction reminded everyone that the truth was slippery. And yet, the pressure to assign blame, to resolve the city's fear, to produce justice real or perceived remained. Marie-Josépha's fate was tied not just to her actions, but to the anxieties of an entire community. The trial, in essence, was a mirror of Montreal itself. Fragile, tense, and searching for order amidst chaos. And in that mirror, Marie-Josèphe Angélique's life, identity, and freedom were reflected back with all the weight of suspicion, fear, and societal expectation. Now let me explain what happened after the trial, how Montreal confronted its fear, and how Marie-Josèphe Angélique's life came to a tragic and unforgettable end. The verdict was clear. Marie-Josèphe was found guilty of setting the fire that had consumed 45 buildings, including the Hotel D. The court pronounced the sentence, execution by hanging, a punishment meant to be public, final, and terrifying. And yet, even as the words were spoken, the air in the courtroom seemed charged with disbelief. Could one woman bear the full weight of such devastation? The sentence was not limited to hanging. A punishment of torture had been added, an additional layer meant to serve as a warning. The authorities intended for her death to resonate beyond her body, to impress upon the city the consequences of rebellion or defiance, especially from those who had no power in the social hierarchy. The reactions of Montreal's citizens were mixed, though fear dominated. Some felt relief, as if the city had finally restored order. The fire had left wounds-burned homes, lost possessions, shattered routines, and holding someone accountable gave a sense of closure. Yet others were unsettled, uneasy at the severity of the punishment, at the sight of a woman condemned to die in front of the public. On the day of the execution, the streets were packed. Crowds gathered to witness, to participate in what had become both a spectacle and a warning. There was a mix of curiosity, fear, and solemnity. The fire that had sparked the disaster was no longer visible, but its echoes remained in every shocked expression. Marie-Josèphe was brought forward, restrained but composed. Some accounts describe her demeanor as calm, others as resolute. She faced the crowd, aware that the eyes of the city were upon her. She became both victim and symbol, standing at the intersection of justice, prejudice, and societal need for order. As she was prepared for hanging, murmurs spread among the spectators. Some cursed, others whispered prayers. Children were shielded from the worst sights. For many, it was a grim education in the harsh realities of law, hierarchy, and the consequences of perceived crime. The execution itself was swift, a stark and final gesture. Marie-Josépha's life ended under the weight of the sentence. Her death was meant to serve as a caution, yet it also ignited debate, reflection, and a sense of unease about justice, fairness, and human cruelty. In the aftermath, the city grappled with its emotions. Some residents felt a grim satisfaction, believing order had been restored. Others were haunted by doubt, wondering whether the true culprit had ever been punished, whether justice had truly been served. Over time, Marie-Josèphe Angélique's story transformed in the collective memory. To some, she became a symbol of rebellion. To others, she was a cautionary tale, a reminder of the consequences of anger and defiance. And for historians, her life and death became a lens through which to examine race, power, and injustice in 18th century Montreal. Her execution also influenced how the city remembered the fire itself. It was no longer only a story of destruction. It became a story of accusation, trial, and punishment, intertwined with societal fear and the complexities of colonial law. People debated her guilt for years, questioning whether she acted alone at all, or whether she was a convenient scapegoat for a city eager to find someone responsible. In this way, Marie-Josépha's story endured. It was recounted in whispers, recorded in official accounts, and eventually analyzed by historians. She became more than a figure of her time. She became a symbol of injustice, a reminder of how fear and prejudice can shape judgment. Even today, when we speak of Marie-Joseph Angélique, there is a mix of horror, respect, and reflection. She embodies both the tragedy of an individual caught in forces beyond her control and the broader societal struggles over race, status, and morality. The fire, the trial, the execution, they form a sequence that illustrates the fragility of human life under rigid systems of power. Marie-Joseph Angélique's name lives on as a reminder that history is not just about events, it's about the people who inhabit them, the choices they make, and the society that judges them. The city returned to its routines, rebuilt its homes, and carried on, but the story of that night, of the fire, and of Marie-Joseph lingered. It became part of Montreal's identity, a cautionary tale, and a symbol that continues to provoke thought, empathy, and debate. Her life, her trial, and her death serve as a lens into a world where justice was entangled with fear, prejudice, and social hierarchy. And though the flames are long gone, the questions she leaves behind about guilt, blame, and the human cost of societal fear continue to burn in our collective imagination. Marie-Joseph Angélique's story reminds us that history is not just about what happens, but how people respond, how societies assign blame, and how memory preserves both truth and interpretation. Her execution was the end of her life, but it was only the beginning of her legacy, a legacy marked by tragedy, injustice, and the enduring tension between fear and fairness. Through her story, we glimpse the harsh realities of slavery in Canada, often overlooked in the broader narrative of North American history. She was a Black woman, an enslaved person, navigating a world designed to limit her freedom at every turn. Her alleged crime, the fire, became a focal point for a city desperate to restore order, to assign blame, and to project its fears. In examining the events, we see how power structures can distort justice, turning individuals into scapegoats for collective anxiety. Marie-Joseph's trial reflects a society that judged her not only for her actions, but for her very identity. And yet, her story has survived centuries, preserved in legal records, chronicles, and now in popular culture. Historians continue to debate her guilt, her motives, and the fairness of her trial. Every retelling reminds us of the fragility of justice when prejudice is allowed to guide judgment. Artists, filmmakers, and writers have revisited her story, portraying her as both a criminal and a symbol of resistance. Through these depictions, Marie-Joseph has become a figure through which audiences confront the history of slavery, racial injustice, and societal fear. Her story invites reflection on the human cost of societal scapegoating, the dangers of moral panic, and the persistence of systemic inequality. For students, historians, and curious minds, her life offers an educational opportunity to explore these themes and understand the broader context of colonial Montreal. By examining the fire, the trial, and the execution, we are forced to ask uncomfortable questions about justice, power, and empathy. Her legacy challenges us to consider how societies assign blame, how narratives are constructed, and how history remembers those at the margins. Even today, the memory of Marie-Joseph Angélique sparks debate, reflection, and moral contemplation. Her story leaves us with more questions than answers, a reminder that history is rarely black and white. By reflecting on her life, we honor the lessons it teaches about injustice, resilience, and the consequences of fear-driven judgment. If her story moved you, if it made you question what you thought you knew about history, slavery, or justice, take a moment to share it. Talk about it, research it, reflect on it. Let her life be more than a tale from the past. Let it be a conversation in the present. And if you want to explore more stories like Marie-Joseph Angélique's, stories that challenge, educate, and provoke reflection, don't forget to subscribe. Tell me, where are you watching from? Your perspective matters.